In early February 2023, officials of the Russia's Bryansk region proudly claimed that they had reinforced the border with Ukraine in the course of the first year of the war. The governor, Alexander Bogomaz, even met with officers from the so-called separate grouping of Forces for Border Protection and boasted about how the military commanders were praising the formidable fortifications. Little did he know that just 3 weeks later, the border will be inspected again by his compatriots. The only problem is that it will be inspected and then crossed not from the Russian side, but from Ukrainian one. Around 8 am on March 2nd, 2023, small groups of the Russian Volunteer Corps soldiers, covertly deployed to the Ukraine's Chernihiv region, crossed the border completely unnoticed. Numbering between 20 and 50 men, they infiltrate the villages of Lyubechane and Sushane, facing no significant resistance. By 10 am, the Russians realize something is happening, but the separate grouping of Forces for Border Protection is slow to respond. Russian media act quicker, spreading rumors of multiple either captured or killed civilians in the villages, without any evidence. Meanwhile, Denis Kapustin posts a video from Lyubechane calling on his compatriots to rebel against the Russian government.
Мы здесь для того, чтобы сказать всем гражданам Российской Федерации: пришло время бороться. Мы взяли в руки оружие 24 февраля 2022 года и продолжаем отстаивать свободу украинцев и свою честь, как русских людей. К чему призываем и вас.
After a few more videos, proving with certainty that Ukrainian allies are in 2 villages, the Russian Volunteer Corps vanishes as quickly as they arrived, retreating back to Ukraine by 2 p.m. Russian forces enter the village around 4 p.m., finding no one. They declare the area clear of saboteurs and also lose 4 National Guardsmen as wounded due to landmine placed to cover the RVC's retreat. This small raid marks the first direct incursion into mainland Russia, something unthinkable when Russia first launches full-scale invasion of Ukraine. On April 6th, the RVC launches another raid, this time entering the villages of Sluchevsk and Zapesochye. They eliminate 1 border guard and wound 2 others with pre-placed landmines before retreating. At least 1 RVC soldier is wounded, since this time Russian drone has spotted the infantry groups. However, extremely inaccurate mortar fire and drone-dropped grenades do little harm to retreating rebels. The 2 attacks clearly outline the tactic used by Ukrainian allies. Using drones, they find the gap in border defenses and then attack in small infantry groups through the complex terrain that prevents any use of vehicles. After entering the town, RVC and allies usually take foothold in buildings, mine the area, provide evidence of presence through videos, and vanish. But what is the point of these raids outside of media effect? We will discuss this a little bit later. And here, it's also a good time to introduce the Russian Volunteer Corps. Formed in August 2022 during Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the organization unites Russians eager to fight against Vladimir Putin's government alongside the Ukrainian armed forces. Whether the RVC is officially part of Ukrainian military remains unclear due to conflicting claims, but Ukraine undeniably supplies its equipment and provides a base for operations. The RVC also maintains strong ties with the Freedom of Russia Legion, a similar organization within the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. So, less than 3 months after their first raid, it's time for a long-awaited crossover. On the morning of May 22nd, 2023, not a small sabotage group, but a full column of forces featuring 2 tanks, several Humvees and RAPs heads towards the Grayvoron border checkpoint. After tanks and artillery pound the area from Ukrainian territory, the column rapidly crosses the border, seizing the checkpoint. Tanks breach the main building's wall, and infantry quickly pours in. Russian border guards, who are taken by surprise by mobile adversary forces appearing from nowhere, forget about their only armored vehicle, BTR-82A, and either retreat or enter skirmishes in disarray just to be swiftly crushed by attackers. Soon, the checkpoint is under full control of the Russian Volunteer Corps, Freedom of Russia Legion, and Polish Volunteer Corps. Reinforcements from Ukrainian territory arrive to hold the area, while assault forces push forward. The RVC and allies enter Kozinka village, with the support of the Ukrainian helicopters, securing multiple buildings and capturing the town. After routing the border guards, they encounter virtually no resistance. Russian attack helicopters slowly begin converging on the area of the breakthrough, but fly low to avoid Ukrainian air defenses, which recently inflicted heavy losses on Russian aviation in the Bryansk region. Taking advantage of the disorganized resistance, small groups of attackers infiltrate the nearby villages of Gora Podol and Glotovo, though they lack numbers to maintain full control of the settlements. The entire force breaking through the Russian border consists of no more than 200 men. Meanwhile, Russian media face difficulties covering the incident and resorts to claiming that everything is a part of a secret plan, even as they announce an evacuation of Grayvoron. In reality, it appears that the Russians were again caught off guard, failing to improve reconnaissance and fortifications on the border after the earlier raid. By 6 p.m., regular Russian forces finally begin arriving and engaging in battles with the RVC and their allies in Gora Podol, Glotovo and Grayvoron, though their efforts remain slow and disorganized. As night falls, skirmishes continue, with the Russians struggling to pinpoint the exact locations of attackers. Ukrainian artillery continues to provide support from across the border. By May 23rd, Russia's separate grouping of forces for border protection resorts to artillery strikes as well, targeting the Grayvoron checkpoint and destroying several vehicles, including 3 Humvees, a Polish AMZ ZIG-2, and the Ukrainian Cobra armored mobility vehicle there. Further north, RVC and allies also abandoned 2 Max Prom reps overnight and evacuated the third one with a tank after the damage. Some additional losses on the attack groups are also inflicted by Lancet drones and artillery. Russians go as far as trying to completely wipe out the checkpoint buildings with airstrikes. However, in a risky but disappointing sortie, 2 Russian Su-34s flying at extremely low altitude miss with all 4 bombs and no longer attempt to repeat the attack. The losses from artillery, however, likely diminish the mobility of assault groups, so approximately by the noon of May 23rd, the raid is over and the retreat to Ukraine begins. It goes pretty smoothly, as Colonel General Alexander Lapin, the head of the Russian separate grouping of forces for border protection, is preoccupied not with planning the pursuit of the enemy, but with posing on camera and personally commanding a platoon of soldiers and vehicles on the streets of empty village of Glotovo.
Вперед, 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 вперед! Обгоняйте, ёпты! Вперед, блядь! Вперед, парни! За родину!
Worth mentioning that Lapin has a unique reputation, being the author of the catastrophe on the Siversky Donets River, where the entire Russian mechanized battalion was destroyed during the crossing attempt. We covered this in detail in our Battle for Severodonetsk video. Just in a few months after that, the whole Russian front line under his command collapsed during the Ukrainian Kharkiv counteroffensive. Despite past failures, Alexander Lapin continues to be responsible for the troubled Russian border. After a short pause, on June 1, 2023, Ukrainian artillery intensifies fire near the village of Shebekino, and the small infantry groups again attempt to cross the border. The monocrystal factory in Shebekino, which produces synthetic subfires for military use, is also destroyed. Between June 1st and 4th, both sides primarily exchange artillery fire, but eventually, the RVC and the Freedom of Russia Legion break through the border again, entering this time Novata Volzhanka village and engaging in skirmishes on the outskirts of Shebekino. Facing elements of the 2nd Guard Spetsnaz Brigade, the rebels release a video on June 4th, offering to exchange 2 Russian POWs for a peaceful conversation with the governor of Belgorod region, Vyacheslav Gladkov. When Gladkov declines, the rebels reveal additional 10 captured Russian soldiers from Novata Volzhanka, announcing their transfer to Ukraine. Still alive at this time, Wagner PMC leader Yevgeny Prigozhin was the only one who accepted their offer, securing the return of 3 POWs. Ironically, it wouldn't be long before he met his own end. On June 5th, Ukrainian allies continued to control Novata Volzhanka and engage in active combat with arriving Russian forces. During these battles, Colonel Andrei Stasyev, a former commander of the 31st Separate Airborne Assault Brigade, is killed in action, together with the commander of the 1009th Motorized Rifle Regiment, Colonel Vladimir Kuznetsov. The RVC also suffers losses, including the death of the senior officer Danil Maznik with call sign Shaiba. Fighting in Novata Volzhanka continues for another week, but by June 11th, the RVC and allies retreat to Ukraine. Worth mentioning that these events were quickly overshadowed and likely served as another small diversion right during the beginning phase of the Ukrainian 2023 summer counteroffensive. The next cross-border raid, launched in March 2024, aimed to escalate further, but faced stiffer resistance as Russian forces had nearly a year to adapt. 2 days before the attack, Russian drone reconnaissance spots Ukrainian vehicles near the border, and all resources are thrown into preventing the upcoming raid. The Lancet drones, bombs, and even Iskander ballistic missiles are used for strikes on lone vehicles on Ukrainian territory, with extremely questionable results, totaling 1 destroyed tank and likely 2 self-propelled artillery pieces. Nevertheless, on March 12, 2024, the Russian Volunteer Corps and its allies, including the recently formed Siberia Battalion, attempt to break through the border in the area of Odnorobivka from Kharkiv region, as well as targeting the villages of Nekhoteivka and Spodaryushino in Belgorod and the village of Tetkino in the Kursk region. Heavy exchange of artillery and drone strikes follows as well. At Nekhoteivka border checkpoint, a pair of tanks first bound Russian positions before attempting to cross the border with infantry support. Without much resistance, they continue to hit buildings, allowing friendly forces to take a foothold inside. However, one of the tanks is damaged by landmines placed on the checkpoint and the crew retreats with the remaining tank. The infantry soon follows, as Russian artillery and aviation quickly respond, pounding already damaged buildings. At the same time, near Spodaryushino, the RVC and allies attempt to breach the border with a small number of BMPs, APCs, and engineering vehicles. Russians on the border are quickly overwhelmed, resorting to retreating and even raising a white flag on forward positions. However, the successful attack does not last, as rebels are hammered by Russian artillery and drones, which force them to abandon damaged IMR-2, Brem-1, and at least one BMP-1. On the following day, the RVC and allies lose another IMR-2 and T-80 BVM, but continue their assaults. By March 14th, the area around Tetkino and Spodaryushino becomes the focus of the attack force efforts against hastily redeployed elements of the 138th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade. Airstrikes reach as far as Velika Pisarivka in the Ukrainian Sumy region, where Russian forces destroy a bridge apparently used to supply the cross-border raid. Overall, the attack force suffers heavy losses of at least 30 men and is forced to abandon several more vehicles, retreating by March 14th. However, in Kozinka, the RVC and allies establish a more stable foothold and engage in skirmishes with the small Russian infantry groups. The rebels also infiltrate the town of Gorkovsky, entering and leaving undetected. As the full attention of both sides shifts to Kozinka, the Ukrainians use the ace down their sleeve. In support of the land invasion, Russian rebels for the first time cross the border using 2 ex-American UH-60 Black Hawks belonging to Ukraine's defense intelligence and launch a small air assault on the town. Surprised Russian forces retreat but continue to pressure the attack force with drones, artillery, and aviation. There may have been multiple small waves of helicopter assaults, as evidence suggests more than just UH-60s were involved. On March 17th, however, Ukraine loses one Mi-24 to Russian manpads in the area of Lukashivka. The helicopter likely supported the many air assaults, so loss leads to the gradual scaling down of the incursion. Nevertheless, the RVC and allies continue resistance in the western part of Kozinka through March 16th. Russians hesitate to deploy significant forces against the rebels, as the proximity of the Ukrainian border means adversary artillery could quickly respond. However, small groups of operatives from the 2nd Guard Spetsnaz Brigade and lone vehicles actively scout the area. During one such mission, the RVC captures the Russian platoon commander. Several infantry attacks are repelled with drone assistance, primarily using ambush tactics. By March 19th, the RVC and allies retreat back to Ukraine from Kozinka, similar to previous raids. Coincidentally, the raid occurs during the Russian presidential elections, or more accurately, the reappointment of Vladimir Putin, spanning from March 15th to 17th. At first glance, the raids carried out by the Russian Volunteer Corps, the Freedom of Russia Legion, and the Siberia Battalion into Russian territory appear bold but ultimately ineffective. These cross-border attacks, with clear but unspoken Ukrainian involvement, do succeed in raising tensions along the frontier. Yet, Russian forces already stationed in the region managed to at least contain each breakthrough attempt, while rebels deliberately retreated each time due to lack of troops to hold a significant area. Moreover, the Russians quickly turned border villages into ruins, so, by the time of the third major raid is over, these villages are practically uninhabitable leaving nothing for the rebels to hold or defend. From a tactical perspective, these raids might seem like a waste of Ukrainian resources, an effort to boost the reputation of rebel units and remind Russian population that the war has come to their doorstep. But when viewed from a wider strategic angle, the picture changes entirely. The raids were not solely about capturing the territory or holding the ground. Instead, they were crucial reconnaissance missions aimed at exposing Russian defenses. The lack of any attacks in the key area of Sudzha was no accident. Sudzha would later become a focal point of the Ukrainian Kursk offensive, falling in just a week when Ukraine will leverage its own armed forces in a cross-border operation. Rebels' raids, despite their outward appearance of failure, served a much deeper purpose. Ukrainian command, using their allies, gathered critical intelligence on Russian defenses, minefield locations, trench systems, and fortifications. They also learned which units were defending the specific areas, how quickly the Russians could react on the ground and in the air, and what roads, railways, and air routes are used for moving reserves and striking invasion force. Without this hands-on reconnaissance, the detailed knowledge needed to plan the Kursk offensive would have been impossible to collect. Additionally, the constant probing and pressure from these raids stretched Russian defenses thin. Every time rebels attacked, Russian forces had to respond, pulling resources away from other places, notably the Sudzha area. The destruction of border villages was not just collateral damage, it weakened their ability to maintain a coherent defensive line over time. Talking about the lines, the raids also crossed many red ones previously drawn by Russian officials and treated seriously by the West. Bringing war back to Russia became a new norm, and the world quickly accepted the new rules of the game, ditching yet another set of escalation concerns. So, while the raids might seem pointless at first, they played a key role in shaping the battlefield for what came next. They helped pave the way for the Ukrainian army's breakthrough in the Kursk offensive by gathering vital intelligence and disrupting Russian defenses. The rebels didn't just fight to gain attention or sow panic. Their efforts allowed to secure the information needed for Ukraine to succeed in the long run. Most importantly, however, they fought to save their own country on their own land.